was 13 and 14 years old, I spent a lot of time at a particular friend's house. Jennifer lived on a long stretched out dirt road in the woods with only a few neighbors spaced out far away from each other. The main road that Jennifer's neighborhood was on had another neighborhood just across from hers. This neighborhood was a pretty large subdivision with a lot of kids that we knew, so we visited it pretty often during the summer to hang out at the pool and playground. Me and my friends started getting pretty rebellious, so late at night when Jennifer's parents fell asleep, we'd sneak out of the back door and walk to the lake. Once we got brave enough, we walked to the neighborhood across the street, walking down the main road. We did this a few times together, and one night we brought along another friend. Me, Jennifer, and our friend Amber walked down the road and on our way to the neighborhood playground. Walking through the subdivision, we were noisy, laughing and shushing each other. We made it to the playground at around 1 to 2 in the morning and swung on the swings talking to each other. It's important that I stress that at this time our parents had warned us about a man that was abducting young girls around our age early in the morning from the bus stops. The investigation was ongoing, so children were being warned to be careful and if we saw anyone suspicious to tell someone. As Jennifer and Amber continued to talk to each other, I was getting a little nervous about being out so late, thinking about the walk back home. I started to calm down and took a look at our surroundings. Across from us on the swings were 3 small trees grown in a row with about 5 feet of space between them. The streetlight still illuminated the whole neighborhood and park, enough to see what was going on around us. As I had my attention in that direction, the silhouette of a very tall man begins walking behind each tree. I can only assume it's to get a better view of us, and that if this person knew the playground wouldn't be empty this late at night, they had to have been watching us on previous nights when we visited, or that they began following us at some point on our way. After clearly seeing the man, I whispered to my friends that we needed to go and that it was getting late. Thankfully, neither of them protested. The tension of knowing that we weren't alone was heavy and all of us grew uncomfortable, even though I had been the only one to see that someone was with us. We paced back home, and on the way out of the subdivision I had told them what I had seen and why we needed to hurry home. We ran back down the road and through Jennifer's neighborhood for our lives. Needless to say, we learned our lesson and never sneaked out on foot ever again, and I'm grateful I noticed and can only hope that his only intention was to watch. So, late night playground creep, I hope we never meet you again. This happened just 30 minutes ago. I just got home as I'm typing this. I was walking home from my friend's house as I usually do. Usually I walk home at around 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. if I stayed out later to hang out. But today I needed to come home early. This happened near the end of my walk. I needed to cross the road from one end of the block to the other side on a walkway for pedestrians, then cross under the bridge. While I was crossing the street, a black old Jeep stopped to let me pass. I waved a thank you and crossed, but when I got to the other side of the bridge, the Jeep pulled up in front of me of where I was walking on my left, parking in the parking spot on the side of the street. At first I thought nothing of it, but for some reason I kept looking and noticed a shadow on the rear side of the car that was the opposite to where I was standing. The driver had gotten out of the car and he was moving fast. This made me surge a little adrenaline because it instantly didn't feel right. As soon as I saw him with the corner of my eyes, as I was still walking forward with no obvious reaction, the man loudly said to me, "Hey, let me ask you a question." I instantly replied casually, "Nah, I'm good," and continued walking up. He then seconded, "Did you break my window? You broke my window." Here's where I turned around and I told him, "What? No, I didn't break your window, dude." And he got visibly angry and started approaching faster. "I'm gonna call the police and tell them you broke my window." At this point I had unzipped my jacket a little and reached into my inner pocket and had a hard grasp on a bottle of beer I had and said loudly to him, "I have a concealed carry and if you don't leave me alone it's gonna hit you." He then got more visibly upset and uncomfortable and said, "You'll hit me, motherfucker, I'll beat your ass up." And I confidently corrected him and said, "If you keep coming close to me I'm going to shoot. This is my last legal warning to you. Go away." Instantly realizing what I just said, he replied with, "Oh, you got a gun? Oh shit." and kept repeating "oh shit" over and over, but started backing off but still facing and looking at me. By now I'm quite distanced from him, maybe 15 feet away. I know it was stupid of me to say I have a gun, but it worked. And if he came at me to try to beat me up, I was ready to pull the bottle out and swing with it. I mean, this is all I had with me. I know I probably should have done differently, but I'm just glad I made it home safely. I hope I never meet that strange angry man in a black Jeep ever again. This happened about 9 years ago when I was in middle school. I had totally forgotten about it until my friend brought it up yesterday. In 7th grade, my best friend and I would walk down to her family's restaurant after school. It was about 4 blocks from the school, not a long walk at all. Between the school and restaurant there was a public park with a playground. Only kids from the school would hang out there. Sometimes when the weather was nice, we would hang out at the park. If we were there for more than an hour, usually her uncle would come to check on us. We did this for most of the school year. Around March, a strange man started showing up around the park trying to talk to girls and asking them about the school work things they like to do. He did this for a couple of weeks, then disappeared. We never really thought much of it. Then one day it was just my friend and I at the park, and he shows up. He starts talking to my friend, trying to get her to go with him somewhere. She keeps telling him no. He grabs her arm and tries to pull her along. We both scream for him to let her go. Her uncle was on the way to check on us and he heard us scream. We can see him running towards us. He tackles the guy and tells us to run to the restaurant. We go and we tell her mom what happened. Her mom calls the cops, but the guy hit her uncle and got away. The cops unfortunately never found him and told us if anything else seemed suspicious to call them. I have no idea what triggered this memory from when I was 11. I was sitting in the living room talking or watching TV or something a few years back, and it suddenly just popped back into my memory. I lived half of my life in Northern Virginia. My old elementary school, where my younger siblings still attended, had an open playground after all school functions were over on weekends and during the summer. There was also a nearby rec center which was closer to the old playground than the new playground. The summer after my 5th grade year in 1999 is when this happened. My mother worked on the garden in front of the school, and with it being summer, she had a decent amount of work to do. We lived pretty close by, so we would go with her to play on the playground and I would ride my bike around. My brother would have just finished 3rd grade, so he could play with the other kids since I was usually nearby. And my youngest sister would have just finished with kindergarten, thus staying with my older sister on the playground or with my mom while she worked in the garden. So I'm riding my bike around, staying on the sidewalk closer to the school, because it was one of those older bikes that you had to pedal backwards to stop, so it wasn't very good on grass or even dirt. Anyway, I'm in front of a section of the school where there's a set of double doors, and the doors are set a ways into the wall so that if you're right in front of them, there is a short wall on either side before you can turn a corner and you can walk down the rest of the building. Note that my mom is close to the entrance of the school, and while she can see the playground and the length of the side of the building, she can't see the area I am speaking of, and I'm pretty sure there's more than one set of doors on this side. I've just gotten to this area where I'm pretty sure there is a water fountain on one of these walls because I can't think of another reason I would be there. And this man walks up to me. He starts talking to me. I start to look at him, noticing the large dark sunglasses, and realize he has his penis out. Being embarrassed that I'm seeing this man peeing, I turn away, but I can see his reflection in the windows on the doors. I don't really understand why he's shaking himself or why his voice is sounding so funny, but I don't really think anything of it. I'm extremely uncomfortable but still answering his questions because he's an adult and I don't want to be rude. I finally gather the courage to hop on my bike and ride away as he is not that close to me, but I don't say anything to my mom because I'm extremely embarrassed. I leave my bike near the car and go to the playground trying to forget this unfortunate experience, where I encounter a boy I had met during that school year named Ronnie. He lived nearby, so I would see him every now and then. We're hanging out near where the other kids are, and he asked me if I seen the weird guy that was peeing. I told him I had, and we talked about how weird it was. As far as I know, he never mentioned this to his parents either. For some reason, we both thought he was peeing, despite Ronnie being a year older than I was. Considering our comprehensive sex ed class and the fact that Ronnie was at that age when most boys are discovering themselves, we really should have known better, but as far as I know, no one on the playground got hurt and none of my siblings ever saw him. The fact that I didn't see any pee should have also been an indicator, but I was really embarrassed about it and wanted to just push it out of my memory. Fast forward to around 2009 and I suddenly and inexplicably recall this occurrence. I tell my mother about it, and being older and much less naive now, I know exactly what he was doing. Still remembering exactly how he stood and everything. My mother was shocked and expressed a wish that I had told her, but doesn't remember anything in the news about a man being caught there or any children disappearing or reporting anything. So we assume that nothing beyond him masturbating in public happened. I don't recall ever having seen him again, though I'm sure seeing him peeing at a playground more than once would make me tell someone. This happened a long time ago when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I'm 27 now. I didn't remember this until I was around 15, and after I did, I asked my mom if it was a real memory or just a dream. She confirmed it happened, or at least the part she knew of. I live in the Netherlands and always have. The conversations were in Dutch, which I'll translate as much as possible. As a kid, I lived in a quiet neighborhood with around 100 houses. It was set up in sort of a big circle with only one way for cars to enter and only 2 other ways to enter by foot or bicycle. We lived on the part of the circle closest to the car entrance, which we called the front street. The other side of the circle we called the back street. On the back street side there was a small playground which could be easily seen from the houses there. It had 2 swings on this T-shaped blue swing set. A yellow climbing tool shaped like a snail, and a small football field with 2 goals. I was allowed to play outside on my own, but wasn't allowed to go to the back street by myself. I did so anyway that day and decided to go to the swings. There was nobody there when I arrived, probably because it was close to dinner time. I was wearing a blue dress, jeans I think, and those white tights that little girls often wore in those days. I was playing around when suddenly 2 guys, which I now think were between 14 and 16, came up to me. I wasn't scared and figured they were just passing through, until one of them suddenly grabbed me from behind and held a pocket knife up to my throat. I was of course very scared, and they started moving me further into the playgrounds to a part filled with bushes and out of sight of the houses. The one that was holding me then said, "Pull down your pants or I will slice your throat." At this moment I was really scared, and even then the first thought that occurred to me was, but I'm not even wearing pants. I was too scared to speak and instead didn't move at all. Then seemingly out of nowhere his grip on me loosened, and looking around I saw why. A woman was walking down the street in front of the playground. I broke loose and ran to her, muttered out what just happened, and ran off again. When I got home a moment afterwards, I didn't tell my mom because I was too scared. I also thought I would get in trouble for going to the back street when she told me not to, so not telling seemed like a better idea. A few months later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to a woman about my mom's age and a boy. One of the 2 boys from that day. I didn't say anything to them, left the door open and ran to my mom. I said to her, "That's him." She had no idea what I was talking about, so I quickly explained. She confronted them, the boy and apparently his mother, but of course denied. As my mom couldn't be fully sure, she didn't follow up on it. All in all, I think I'm very lucky for having gotten off so easily and not realizing what kind of situation I had been in until many years later. I'm really glad nothing bad happened to me. So this happened to me back in November. I'm 13 now, but when this encounter took place, I was 12. I live in Georgia in an apartment and a pretty safe part of town. The only scary thing that has happened to me before this was a criminal living in the very same block as me a few years ago. So the story starts in a local park that doubles as a huge playground. A lot of kids and elderly people like being there. I was out with my friends and we were spinning on one of those spinning carousels talking about video games. Suddenly I spotted an old man and didn't think much of it since a lot of elderly people like to hang around there. But I had a weird gut feeling about him. He was making me feel what I can only describe as unsafe. But I thought it was just the spinning carousel giving my brain a hard time because I am always dizzy after that ride and stopped paying attention to him. A few minutes later, me and my friends decide to leave the park because we were getting bored. While we were walking, I see that same man. This time his stare is fixated on my best friend. We don't think much of it and keep walking. We get close to him and he quickly steps in front of us and says, "Hey kids." My first thought was that he was going to ask us for directions, because that happens a lot in the part of town I live in. Many people are often confused about where to go. He follows it up with, "Would you happen to want some of my goodies?" Being the idiot I am, and instead of walking away, I ask, "What goodies?" He goes silent and starts staring at me, and after a few moments of more silence, he says, "Some of these here drugs. You want some?" He then opens his coat wide open and reveals pockets full of tiny Ziploc bags filled with powdery substances. My friend quickly and silently says, "No thanks," and we start speed walking towards my house. And my friends live in the same block and building just one door away from mine on the 5th floor. He then starts following us in a rather quick manner and almost shouts, "What about some candy? I got some candy too. What about that?" At this point, me and my friends start darting towards our block, not even looking either way while running across the road. Luckily, there were no cars around, and once we got to our block, we felt much safer. There were a few people sitting there on benches and everyone in the block knew us, so if this old man tried anything, we knew we would be safe. I told my parents everything that happened the moment I got home. They called the cops, and to this day the guy has yet to be found. My husband and I with our kids recently moved to a new city. It wasn't completely new to me as I had grown up in the surrounding areas. The move was hell with our toddlers and I knew they must have been having a difficult time. However, my husband and I just wanted to get everything unpacked in the new house before anything else. We made sure to unpack the kids' toys first. After all the unpacking, the kids were beyond restless. We had a hell of a time just keeping them from breaking some of the stuff during unpacking. You know, because kids don't want their toys, they want boxes and anything that isn't theirs. Needless to say, we were all a little restless and a bit agitated. I immediately thought we should take them to a park or meet some of the other kids in the area. I remembered when I was a kid there was a park in town that was just amazing. In my memory it looked like a giant castle, the same size as a 2-story house and had all sorts of extra swings, tire tunnels, etc. I tell my husband to not look up directions and we get in the car and head off to the park. The closer we get, I start to notice how some of the neighborhoods were in some state of disrepair. This area had been hit hard by hurricanes in the early 2000s and it seemed quite a few had not been able to repair their houses, thus the decline of the neighborhoods. I felt bad to see such a nice area become so broken down until we had to stop at a red light before the park. An older woman was standing at the bus stop on the other side of the road of the driver's side. Her clothing was a bit ragged and at first it pulled at my heartstrings enough to ask my husband to let the driver window down so I could ask if she needed some water or something. It's hot as hell down here even in spring and I've worked with the homeless before. My husband was resisting while I was thinking I should tell her that she could get free water at most fast food joints, when she starts screaming and pointing directly at us saying something about stupid cunt. It was a bit intelligible because my husband never actually rolled down the window. Well, of course I'm uncomfortable because I know a lot of homeless are mentally unstable, if not worse. I'm with my family and my husband decides that now is not the time and place for my soft heart to help someone. I agree, looking back at my kids who completely ignored the scene and were excited about the park they could see. We get to the park and just like the neighborhood surrounding it, it was crap. My husband and I aren't stupid and we take turns when going to the parks to check the playground equipment and surrounding play area for anything harmful. It might sound like we are paranoid, but I can't tell you how many times we've actually found some really crazy stuff. Surprisingly and thankfully, my husband came across nothing, and so I started explaining the rules to my kids before we get outside. We aren't too overprotective. We want them to have a bit of independence within eyeshot, but they are only 2 and 4. My husband also checked to see if he could see the woman, but the bus had stopped, and after it had left, she was no longer there. We get out and we decide we're going to shadow the kids today to keep an extra close eye on them. Well, my son loves the swings, so after a quick game of chase, we head for the swings. We were there for a few minutes, counting, talking about the sky and such. I looked around to see where my husband and daughter were when suddenly through one of the tunnels comes that older woman. Well, it scared the shit out of me. She crawled out in a weird way and she was talking in a raspy voice the entire time. I decided it's time to leave and get my son out to find my daughter and husband. Well, about this playground. The interior of the castle has all the towers and swing sets with a wooden castle gate surrounding it. Safety for the kids since there is a major street right next to the park. So as you guess, we're blocked by this woman who is coming towards the swings with her head bent down, still mumbling. I put myself between my son and her before we passed, and just as we're about to pass, she jerks her head up and begins to scream at us. I've scooped my son up, still blocking him from her. I start to run towards the exit. I shout for my husband and feel my shirt being pulled back. Luckily, my husband was already coming towards us with my daughter after hearing the scream. Out of instinct, I jerk away and reach for my pocket that has a small can of pepper spray and hold it up until we can all get away safely. My husband takes the kids. He knows that I know what to do and how to protect myself. I'm facing the parking lot and see my husband has gotten the kids in the car. Luckily, she decided to wait for some reason until my kids were out of earshot to threaten my family. She seemed particularly keen on threatening to kill my kids, which internally makes me want to do horrible things to her. However, I stay neutral, refusing to give a reaction. This woman is obviously hostile. I'm gently talking to her, explaining I'm not here to hurt her, and ask if she has any family or if she lives around the area. She completely ignores it and continues on with her incoherent rambling with threats and her mangled. I refuse to pepper spray her because she hasn't really physically hurt me and she's keeping her distance now. My husband apparently called the police because as we were at a standstill for a few minutes, 2 cruisers pulled up. They pull up next to my husband, who points them in our direction. They come over and take her away. She doesn't even struggle. My husband had moved away at this point so the woman wouldn't be able to see our car as she was being arrested. So I wait while they get her in the car. Before she gets in, I see her glance to her left and squint. I come out of the playground with another officer from the other cruiser and she's looking at our car, which is parked by some trees. I look back as they're putting her in and she's mumbling quietly, trying to get another view of our car. As I'm giving a statement, I let the officer know my fears about her getting too good of a glimpse of our car. He just shrugged, cause what can you do, you know, and let me know that they keep a good eye on the park. They reassured me that she'd probably be in custody for a while and would probably forget everything that happened. About a month later, the incident wasn't forgotten, but not fresh either. We never go to that park anymore, just in case. One day I'm in front of our house with the kids, showing them how to pull weeds from the garden. We're having a good time getting dirty when I hear a woman shouting angrily about a block away. I stand up and, staying calm, tell the kids we need to take a water break. We brush off and as we're going inside, the yelling gets closer. I turn and look at the crossroad on our street and sure enough, it's that woman. She now has a shaved head. That's not terribly important, but I can't shake that part. I get the kids inside and she comes to stand by our house on the road. She starts screaming and I can barely make out anything. However, I do hear her say that she found us, now she won and now it's her turn. I obviously call the police, but as I'm on the phone, she sprints off. I let the dispatcher know which way she's heading, but refuse to go outside and keep watch. An officer arrives to make sure we're safe and stays in our neighborhood until the end of his shift, just to make sure everything is okay. A week or so passes without incident, but I still refuse to bring the kids out front just in case. Our backyard is fenced, so that feels safe enough. The next weekend we're all outside just relaxing when we hear banging on our front door. It was so loud we could hear it from our backyard. My husband takes over at this point and goes inside to grab his gun and check the door. I gather the kids' close butts and don't go inside just in case there's an altercation. The knocking stops and I figure my husband is dealing with it. I keep a hold of the kids by telling them a story when suddenly I see hands above our wooden fence. It appears to be someone jumping up to grab on. I get all of us inside and let my husband know what's going on. I call the cops and he heads out front to the fence. My husband comes in and says she ran off. I knew immediately that it was that woman. I asked my husband about it and he confirmed what I thought. He also told me that there were thin scratch marks on the door and a puddle of piss on the welcome mat. Lovely. The cops arrive and we give them everything we know. We even told them about the piss-puddled mat. It's been about a month without incident now. Hopefully she's gone for good. To preface this, I have suffered from death anxiety my entire life. Whether it stemmed from early exposure to death in media or the early deaths of my own family members, I don't know, but I was and am obsessed with it. I vividly remember resigning myself to a violent death as a youngster. So in a way I can ascribe some of the feelings and thoughts I had at the time to this pre-existing fear. But I'd be kidding myself if I attributed all of them to this. In elementary school, I remember snippets of interaction/conversation with a girl named Kayla. Kayla and I were in the same grade and even shared a class at one point. I had always felt that something was a little off with her. She was unkempt, emotionally unstable, and just gave me a strange impression. Kayla had two brothers as well, Sean, who was a grade above us, and Daniel, who was at least 2 years our senior. It's very difficult for me to tell this chronologically or even in a storied fashion, as I only remember certain conversations with them. The three of them lived with their grandmother at the time, and Kayla would tell me these fantastic stories about how their father was very wealthy and lived out of state in a mansion that they'd one day join him in. I also remember being told their mother was using drugs, but I remember very little about that as I didn't have any real understanding of the subject at the time. One day in class, Kayla commented to me that the three of them would mutilate stuffed animals. She described throwing them into the air, stabbing them, and then ripping them to shreds with knives. Around this time, she expressed to me that the eldest brother Daniel had detailed a plan to kill their grandmother and run away with Sean to live with their father. This is where my apprehension about her turned to fear aimed towards her brothers. Another girl I knew told me that she knew Daniel personally, and that he would often express violent thoughts like that and spoke of killing young women specifically. Luckily, my meetings with Daniel were few and far between, and I don't recall ever having a conversation of that nature with them. Sean was a different story, though. I remember him leering at me in the halls, and one day as our lines were passing one another, he looked at me dead in the eyes and said, "You're going to die." This sent me into a panic. I remember being obsessed with the thought of these brothers harming me, and I told my mom. Not really understanding the gravity of the situation or trying to minimize it to calm me, she told me that if he said that to me again, to simply reply, "So is everyone else." Those are my most vivid memories of them, though I do remember some more second-hand stories from daycare friends about how Daniel was dangerous and rolled out his own cigarettes. Nothing really happened to me personally, but I was extremely relieved when they didn't return to school the next year. In my senior year of high school, I began to actively search for these kids to find out what happened to them. Though it was extremely difficult at first, they have a very unusual and, to be honest, hard to spell last name. Nothing of interest came from that beyond my desire to see how they turned out. I mentioned the story in passing to my best friend at the time, and she was pretty horrified by my retelling. She then called upon a girl we both knew was in our grade in elementary school, and I asked whether or not she remembered them. Boy howdy did she. She was very reluctant to speak to me, but eventually told me she was actually very close friends with Kayla, going to her home at times after school. What she described to me only brought home every uneasy feeling I had about these kids. According to her, Sean was the violent one, not Daniel. And the one incident I could get her to describe to me involved Sean beating on the girls, choking Jess almost to the point of passing out. She described Kayla and herself locking themselves in a room as he was coming at them, She told me that Daniel had protected them on the multiple occasions things like this happened. The fear in her eyes, even 10 plus years later, took me aback, and I didn't press for more details. Today, in doing some research for this post, I found that both of the boys have criminal records now, but for seemingly non-violent offenses. The offenses included resisting public officers, obstructing, and possession of drugs. Recounting all of these events like this kind of makes me sympathize with that family, though. It seems like no one really cared enough to get them help as children, and I can only imagine what else they got involved with during their adolescent years. Kayla, Sean, and Daniel, I wish all of you the best, but I hope we never meet again.